October 2004, I was Detective Sergeant in Balbriggan Garda Station. A guy came in, one of the detectives came in and said there's some sort of a burglary in progress in the Knoll. I just grabbed a set of keys to a car, made my way down to Lambay View, which was the name of the house that this burglary had taken place. As I was driving up, there was calls coming in over the radio about a lady being assaulted, that is a burglary gone wrong, and it said this lady is dead. I arrived at the scene. Being a qualified and experienced scenes of crime examiner, I went in to have a look. It's a sight I'll never forget. My God, she was like pulverized. Her hair was matted in blood. Over her right ear there was a gash you can see down to her skull. It was about 5 inches long. You could see that there was severe force used to inflict that. So the poor woman had no chance whatsoever, absolutely not. Like, it was savage, cold, just like unbelievable really, you know.
Rachel Callaley was discovered by her mother, Rose.
I will never forget the sight that met my eyes. I'll never forget it. And God love her. I knew immediately I looked at her, she was murdered. I remember just kneeling down beside her, and I remember putting my hand over and I kept rubbing her arm, and she was like marble.
Rose's husband, Jim, arrived at the scene soon afterwards.
Oh, it was terrible. I hate even thinking about it, you know.
None of us expect to lose a child, you know, but it was dreadful.
It was a terrible part of our life, you know.
It's just a parent's nightmare, like. And I remember Jim, my God, the grief. That's my daughter down there, that's my daughter that's killed down there. And he was roaring and shouting at me and venting a little bit of anger, but it was pure just grief, like, you know, what he had to witness. A good investigator has to have empathy. He has to see what pain these people go through. You know, these loved ones, they have to be looked after as best they can by the state. Who has Rachel got to speak for? But the guards, the person investigating this, to find the truth.
She was a real natural beauty, wasn't she? Isn't that a beautiful one?
Yeah.
And that was her wedding day.
Yeah. Good, she looked well there, didn't she?
We had 2 boys first. The 2 boys were adopted, and then we adopted Rachel. She was like a breath of fresh air. She really was a joy.
She went in for everything. Basketball, badminton. She was on a hockey team. She went in for swimming. Just always on the go, you know. That's the way I remember her.
And she'd loads of friends. She would walk to Cork in her bare feet for you. She was very, very good-natured and very loving.
Oh, that was gorgeous. Here's Rachel.
Rachel was 30 years old. She lived in Lambay View in North Dublin with 2 young sons and her husband, Joe. Detective Sergeant Pat Marry now began a murder investigation.
Rachel's movements on that morning was the same as any other school-going morning. Joe told us, and the Callaleys told us, that she'd leave the house around 9 o'clock and she'd drop one of the children to the school, and then she'd drop the other child to the creche.
A CCTV camera just around the corner from Lambay View captured Rachel's movements.
The CCTV footage showed a car exactly the same as Rachel's passing at 3 minutes past 9. We knew from the creche she was there at 9:30 because people had seen her, and we have her car returning to her house past the quarry at 9:41. From the quarry to her house was 30 seconds in the car.
Pat could now conclude Rachel was murdered sometime after 20 to 10.
Joe then informed us that at 1:30 p.m. approximately, he got a call from the creche to say that Rachel hadn't collected the child. He rang her phone and didn't get an answer. He rang the Callalees home number and asked Rose to go out and see where Rachel was, that he was worried.
She thought she might have fell or something, you know. So Rose went straight out there.
Rose found Rachel's body at 2 p.m. Pat now needed to uncover what happened in the 4 hours and 20 minutes before then.
We had to find out the answers to these questions. Who hit her? Why did they kill her? What was behind all of this? What was the motive?
But Pat wasn't the only one trying to find answers.
Rachel O'Reilly, the 30-year-old mother of a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old child, was brutally beaten to death.
Badly beaten body was discovered several hours
The body
later.
of Rachel O'Reilly was found in the bedroom of her home at the Knoll in North.
A post-mortem reveals she was killed with a blunt
Say the
instrument.
Gardaí have not found the murder weapon and have no real leads in the case.
My name is Jenny Friel and I'm a journalist with the Irish Daily Mail newspaper, formerly Ireland on Sunday. Well, from the moment it happened, it was a huge story. A young mum of 2 being found bludgeoned to death in her own bedroom in her house in a rural part of North Dublin. I think Rachel was only born a year before I was, so yeah, I was very aware of that particular story, and also because by the time I got asked to follow up on it, the working theory was that it was a burglary gone wrong.
Pat was quickly skeptical that Rachel was killed by burglars.
We looked at every burglary in the area and see was there any correlation to or anything that connected the crimes, and there wasn't,
For Pat, it just did not look like a typical burglary.
A scene talks to you. A scene tells you things. I noticed the kitchen table turned over, which is unusual. Kitchen presses pulled out. Burglars don't come in. They don't open kitchen presses. They don't open the knife drawer. They don't open where you keep the cups and saucers. They just don't do that. And also, we discovered in the house that there was money left there. Rachel had money in her bag, and there was money in the utility room, which was never, touched.
The team extended their search.
There was some items found in a culvert up the road slightly from the house. I think a jewellery box and a camcorder, which was identified as coming from the house. But burglars don't do that either, you're not going to hide it to come back again. You just know these things from your experience of dealing with burglaries. It was a staged burglary.
But the most decisive evidence was the state of Rachel's body.
It's highly unusual to see someone in the state I saw Rachel O'Reilly in, having been administered such a beating by a burglar. The viciousness of the assault was a pure display of hate for this woman. If you hate someone that much, you're going to know them. And I believed she knew who did this to her.
Pat began to investigate whether any of Rachel's acquaintances could have wanted her dead.
Our starting point was to talk to Joe O'Reilly to see if there was anyone in her life that would do what they did. Maybe she has some enemies. He went on to name people that he worked with, that he had sacked and he had run-ins with.
Pat and his team followed up with everyone on Joe's list.
All the people that Joe had named were people that we could easily rule out of any connection with Lambay View on the day. And then I asked him, maybe she was having an affair and that you had a disgruntled wife who got this done. And he says, no, neither of us were having affairs. Now, that just sparked with me. Why did he say neither of us having an affair? I didn't ask him about him. I said it to Joe. I said, are you sure you weren't having an affair? And he looked at me right in my eyes and I was looking at him. And he says, I did have an affair. And I said, who'd you have an affair with? He said, a girl by the name of Nikki Pelly. It was only an affair, it's over now. And he says, I don't want anyone to know about the affair, and I don't want my family to know. It made us sit up and think, well, is there something else to this,
At the time Rachel was murdered, Joe was 31. He was working for an outdoor advertising agency. He was a manager there. He was a non-drinker. He was a physical guy, he went to the gym a lot. He was well liked by their friends and he was sociable.
You over here, come talk. Come on. 5 kids.
I asked Joe, could he account for his movements that morning? He said he got up at 5:20 a.m. He said he slept in a separate room, and the reason he done that is because he didn't want to waken Rachel when he was going out so early. He said he went to a gym on Nanger Road. He left the gym and arrived at his workplace in Viacom at about 7:15, and he remained there until approximately 8:15.
At 8:15, Joe left his office and drove to Broadstone bus depot in Phibsborough. He was to meet a work colleague and inspect advertising in buses.
He said he went back to Viacom after leaving Broadstone in Phibsborough at 11:20 approximately, and he got back to Bluebell Industrial Estate to Viacom at around 12 midday. Around 1:30 p.m. he got a phone call from the creche to say that Rachel hadn't collected the child.
Joe arrived home shortly after Rose and Jim.
Rose said to him, Rachel, she's down the bed, I think she's been murdered. And he ran down and he saw her and he got down on his knees, put his hand in, and he said, Rachel, Rachel, what are you after doing? You know, which was a strange thing to say.
Joe hugged Rachel's body, getting her blood on his clothes. Pat was concerned that Joe was compromising the crime scene, so quickly sealed off the house for a forensic examination. One week later, Joe was allowed to return.
He rang here and he said he'd got the keys, the forensics were finished. He said there's an inner piece in the house, and he said I was thinking if you and Rose came down, maybe the do you's good. So I put it to Rose, and Rose said to me, Jim, sure, I wouldn't go down there. And I said, well, the two of us in a bad way, I don't think we could be any worse.
It might do you good, Rose, he said. You know, would you not give it a try?
When we went down there, it was, oh God, I wanted to run out of the place. Jeez, when I saw that, it was like a morgue. There was blood everywhere, ceilings, walls and all, and I nearly got sick.
But more disturbing than the house was Joe's behaviour.
He was reenacting what the murderer would have done. And I remember I couldn't even think of what he was saying to us.
He said, I reckon this is the way it happened. He said the murderer must have got her down on the ground and kept batting her on the head.
He went through the actions of how Rachel would have got hit on the front of the head. She would have went down. He even enacted stepping over the body. Whoever done this went into the bathroom to clean up and heard her gurgling and came back and finished her off.
I was getting sick. I had to go outside, you know, and what he was doing then, you see, he was down on the floor and he was reenacting the whole thing, and he was looking at me and looking at Rose. And he was getting a kick out of looking at the horror in her face. I'd say my face was drained out. And, you know, his eyes were jumping out of his head looking at me. Sadistic pleasure he was getting out of looking at you squirming, you know. There and then I knew then that he was a psycho, you know.
So if I'd any doubt at all, I was saying to myself, walking out that house, it was Joe done it.
Over the following days, Joe O'Reilly's behaviour became increasingly erratic. He even began engaging with the media, so journalist Jenny Frail approached him for an interview.
I thought that I'd get there and I'd be politely told to go away, and I was prepared for that. So when he agreed to do an interview, I was quite surprised. And also he had agreed, you know, for a photographer to come with me, which is for a newspaper is a big deal as well.
O'Reilly met Jenny at Lambay View, the scene of the murder, where he now posed for photographs.
He was like a tour guide. He was talking us through the blood splatter on the walls. He was pointing up to the ceiling, the skirting board, talking us through how ferocious the attack must have been for there to be as much blood splatter as there was. I had never experienced anything like this before. He got down on one knee and demonstrated how the killer would have basically bought the weapon down on Rachel's head. At that point, I felt a bit queasy, and I asked him where the bathroom was. I just needed a break. I remember thinking at the time that I guess I had to put it down to his grief and possibly shock. Maybe this was just his way of coping and trying to do everything he could that might help catch her killer.
But this was not the end of Joe O'Reilly's media push.
On the day of the murder, I did say to him, Joe, there's going to be media interest in this, and I'd prefer you don't talk to the media. Joe done the opposite.
With me tonight, Rachel's husband Joe and her mother Rose. You're very welcome. Thank you for coming in. Rose, thank you. Tell me a little bit about Rachel, Joe. What sort of a woman was she?
Just a normal woman.
At that stage, I couldn't bear to be in his company because I knew, you know, he had murdered Rachel. You know, to have to sit beside him, it was awful now.
It was an extraordinary piece of television. And anyone will tell you this, it was Rose Callilly's body language and just the look of anger on her face. She just looked angry. She couldn't look at Joe when he spoke. She was holding herself extremely rigidly.
How did you two meet?
We met years ago, about 13 years ago, at softball, which is a game like baseball, where Rachel took it up. She was a lot better than I was. So
he's so blasé and laid back. Like, look at, he was coming out with flippant answers about when he got engaged and everything.
You proposed to her where?
in Paris, up the Eiffel Tower. So it was either propose or she'd throw me off. So.
All right.
Joe was being Joe. He was being super friendly and doing his best to answer every question he could.
You hear, out-of-body experiences and stuff. I just literally felt like I was at the outside looking in at myself.
When I look back, I don't know how I got through it. I just was recoiling, and when he'd say something, I'd feel like jumping up and running off. To be honest with you, that night, my whole thing was getting through it and not to react to him at all.
She's gone, she's dead, what happened? And I said, I think she fell.
If I knew the police thought it better that we didn't, I wouldn't have went with him. But it was an ordeal, I can tell you.
My view as well would be, and again it's just my view, it's not a police theory, it's just my own personal belief, is that she knew the person, because why else would you kill her? If it's a violent robbery, why go to the extreme of murdering the person unless they can identify you? And that's why we've talked about this and practically nothing else for the last 3 weeks. We just feel it's someone she would have known or someone she could have identified.
No, she didn't know you well enough. That makes me physically ill. Like he's literally speaking to himself. So it will just send chills up your back.
I picked up Adam, and when I was picking up
television, the impact it has, I think that was the turning point. In a case that had already stoked a lot of interest, it just went crazy after that, because it was unusual that a family went on that soon after a murder.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
But for Pat, there was more to Joe O'Reilly's Late Late Show appearance than what was shown on TV.
I interviewed the staff of the Late Late Show, the people who were in the green room and that, who would have looked after the guests. They said he was acting like a man who wasn't in any way grieving. The Callillys couldn't look at a cup of tea. They were nervous and upset. And Joe scoffed all the sandwiches and all the crisps and drank all the tea.
He was down to sandwiches. He ate half a tray of sandwiches. Someone would be eating one.
He was on his mobile phone and walking around and talking on his mobile phone, and they said he wasn't in one bit clued into what was at stake,
The night produced more than just anecdotal evidence. Pat discovered O'Reilly's affair with Nikki Pelly was far from over.
RTE had offered them, I think, a hotel room to go to and Joe said, I'm not taking up that offer. I have to go, I have to meet a client.
He wasn't going to a business meeting at all. He got your man to leave him up to Nicky Pelly's house with Rafarnham.
Joe O'Reilly had told Pat the affair was over. It was now clear he had lied.
So here you have a case where a man's going on the TV to appeal for witnesses or information in respect of the death of his wife. And then he's gone off with his mistress, like, you know, to spend the night with her. It's just not right, like, you know.
Pat looked deeper into Joe's private life and discovered evidence of a long-standing affair.
He was in love with Nicky Pelly, and he played down his relationship with Nicky. He'd tell Rachel, I'm working late, I'm going to stay in the office, and he was having a full relationship with her.
She had stayed over in Rachel's house one night when she wasn't there. She had met the children. He had, you know, arranged Saturday afternoon outings. I think they brought them to the zoo a few times, and they knew her as their dad's friend, Nicky. And they had a future planned together. It had become a very serious relationship very quickly.
Joe O'Reilly also knew how suspicious the relationship would look to detectives.
He had told Nicky, don't admit that we're having a full-on relationship, because the guards will think it would be a motive, you know, which it was a motive, and which we could establish.
As Pat dug deeper, he discovered evidence of the mental and physical strain Rachel was suffering.
There were friends who kind of spoke about how she developed psoriasis, skin condition, because she was so stressed out. On one occasion, she said that she worried about having put on weight, and maybe Joe wasn't interested in her because of that, and she was going to try and lose weight. And maybe she had to pay more attention to what she was wearing, because she wasn't really into clothes and fashion.
They were all telltale signs of deep emotional abuse, something that at the time wasn't as well recognized as it is today.
Sarah Benson, CEO with Women's Aid. Back in 2004, I was actually the manager of the National Domestic Violence Helpline, and that particular case was very much on my radar at the time when it happened. I think still now, but even more so back in 2004, there would have been a common misperception that the most common sign of a domestic abuse relationship was physical abuse. That's not actually the case. Domestic violence is not a single act of violence. What it is at its core is a wide range of manipulative behaviours, emotional abuse, economic abuse, and also then, of course, the threat of or actual physical and sexual violence. But it's that pattern of behaviour actually which is the indicator of the fact that a relationship is abusive, is controlling.
I think it became clear how awful Rachel's life had been in the last 6 months to a year. Whatever kind of horrific end she met, she had dealt with such insecurity, stress.
What a domestic violence abuser gains by all of this behaviour, which does require work, is they have control and they have power. And that controlling behaviour causes the person who's targeted to effectively change, in some cases, nearly every facet of their life, what they wear, who they see, what they do, who they talk to. Control is the beating heart of a domestic abuse relationship.
Joe O'Reilly was clearly emotionally abusive. Now a close friend of Rachel described an incident which could have resulted in physical abuse too.
Rachel had confided in her that Rachel and Joe had a row the night before, a flaming row, and that Rachel believed that Joe was having an affair. And she put an ultimatum to Joe, if you don't change your way, things are going to change. And that was it.
Pat had established a clear motive. But there was a problem. Joe O'Reilly had an alibi. On the morning Rachel was killed, he claimed he was 30 kilometres away at Broadstone bus depot with a work colleague.
We wanted to establish, was that person there in the depot that Joe was going to see that morning? And we discovered he couldn't have seen the person that he went to see because he wasn't there. This was very important to us because it broke Joe's alibi. If Joe wasn't seen in Broadstone and there was nobody, and I mean no one that could put him there, where was he?
Pat was now certain O'Reilly had lied about his whereabouts on the morning of Rachel's murder. If he wasn't at Broadstone, could he have been at home with Rachel? Pat turned again to the CCTV from Murphy's Quarry.
Okay, we're just coming up here now to Murphy's Quarry. It's very significant for us in our investigation, in that it was the only CCTV in the area. The camera was up high and it captured the entrance and part of the road.
This was the camera that had filmed Rachel's car on the school run.
We had Rachel's car passing down past the quarry at 9:03 and going up again at 9:41.
While Rachel was on the school run, another car was spotted heading towards the O'Reilly home. It appeared to be a Fiat Marea estate, the same car Joe O'Reilly drove.
We had another car at 10 past going up towards Lambay View, a car we believe to be Joe O'Reilly's car. We could see that same car coming back past the quarry at 9:59.
Could this be evidence of Joe O'Reilly returning to the house, killing Rachel, and then leaving again? It all hung on identifying the car and its owner.
We could establish there's 2,500 such Fiat Marea estate cars in the country. We had to go and try and trace every one of those cars to eliminate them from passing Murphy's Quarries that morning.
Using the National Vehicle Database, the team began contacting Fiat Marea car owners living locally.
We were able to account for all the Fiat Marea estate cars that were registered and owned by people nearest to Lambay View, and there was no doubt in my mind as an investigator that the only Fiat Marea car that was up there at that time was Joe O'Reilly's car.
But was it definitely a Fiat Marea? Only evidence from an expert would hold up in court.
We engaged the services of a company called Calligate in the UK. They were expert CCTV analysts and they could identify cars.
The team hoped for a positive ID, but were disappointed.
It wasn't a 100% hit from Calligate. They could only surmise it was a Fiat Marea estate car. On a scale of 1 to 5, they marked it 4 out of 5. They couldn't be 100% certain.
Without 100% certainty, the evidence would not hold up in court.
Investigations always have setbacks and you don't always get what you want, but you don't lose heart. Even though you might have hit a wall, there's always a way over the wall, around the wall.
Pat needed another way to prove whether Joe O'Reilly was near Lambay View at the time of the murder. So he turned to a type of analysis still brand new in 2004. Pat asked engineers if O'Reilly's mobile phone data could pinpoint his location.
O2 were in a position to tell us of a thing called cell site analysis that could establish where a phone was, what phone mast the phone was pinging off, if they had received or made a call or received or made a text. Now this was all new to us.
It was groundbreaking stuff. Phone signals have to basically ping off the nearest mast, and through that they were able to track Joe O'Reilly's phone on the morning of the murder.
Cell site analysis tracked Joe's phone from his home in the Knoll to his office in Bluebell Industrial Estate. It confirmed he left there at 8:15 and headed to Phibsborough bus depot.
It's at that point that Joe's story begins to come offline. At 8:46 a.m, when Joe told us he was in Phibsborough depot, we have his phone travelling north at the M1-M50 junction. 10 minutes later, at 8:56 a.m, we had him at Richardstown, which was just 5 miles south of his house in the Knoll. At 9:25 a.m, we had Joe at Murphy's Quarries, which is only several hundred yards from his house. And at 9:52 a.m, his phone was still at Murphy's Quarries.
What that proved was that at the time he said he was in Broadstone Garage in Phibsborough checking ads on the side of buses, he wasn't. He was actually in the house at the time when his wife was being murdered.
At last, Pat had the evidence he needed to make a decisive move against Joe O'Reilly.
At around 10:20 this morning, detectives arrested the man at his home in the Knoll area and brought him to Drogheda Garda station for questioning.
Joe was initially arrested on November the 17th, 2004. We put questions to Joe in respect of the phone records, telling lies about his affair, that this was a motive, and to explain all of that. By and large, Joe declined to cooperate with us and say no comment, and that was it.
Pat was left with little to go on.
We had circumstantial evidence. We had no murder weapon. We had no forensics of any benefit. We had no confession. With circumstantial evidence, there always is a doubt.
Joe walked free. The circumstantial evidence was just not enough to charge him. It was a blow to Pat and the team. Months passed. Pat continued working the case, often dropping in on Rose and Jim to ask questions.
Jim, I remember on one of the occasions that I visited the Callally family during the course of the investigation, and there were many. And I'll tell you, Rose does a good sandwich and a cup of tea when you arrive, you know. The pain and suffering that you have gone through, like, it's horrendous, like.
You feel at the time you'll never get over it, but...
And one of those visits, we'd sit around and chat, and I'd tell them how things were progressing, and she came out and says, I wonder what Joe wrote in that note.
Pat had no idea what note Rose was talking about, but it was potentially explosive.
On the night of her wake, the night before her funeral, it was suggested in the Callally household that everyone write notes to her, maybe put in little gifts, things like that.
Joe O'Reilly also wrote a note to Rachel.
Everyone was writing a little note, so he probably felt he had to. But he did write a letter, and he put it in the coffin.
We both thought the same thing. What's written on the note? Will he have a confession on it or whatever? Like, we'll have to get that note.
But to get the note, they'd have to exhume Rachel's body 6 months after she'd been buried.
Garda forensic specialists moved into the Fingal burial ground at first light this morning. The cemetery was sealed off. Gardaí set up a forensic tent and examined the body of Rachel O'Reilly.
The exhumation order was granted by the minister, and we exhumed the body and recovered all the notes that were in the coffin. All those notes were brought then to the technical lab because they had to be dried out, they had to be photographed, they have to be registered, and we were quite happy we recovered the note that Joe had left.
I imagine the Gardaí were possibly a little disappointed when they opened up that letter.
There was great ambiguity about what was written on this card.
It was a strangely heartfelt letter, for want of a better word. It was, "Dear Rachel, I really miss you. Your boys miss you. Everyone misses you. You were so much loved." And he did say something along the lines of, "I'm sorry," but it wasn't an admission, sorry. It was possibly a, "I'm sorry this happened to you."
He was apologising to Rachel for something that only him and her knew about. Now, I was thinking, well, he's apologising for killing her, but it could have been looked on, he was apologising for something else, marriage and maybe not working out or whatever. So it couldn't be put down to that it was an admission.
By now, Pat had arrested O'Reilly twice, but faced with insufficient evidence, had to release him each time.
He left the interview room and he was going out the front with his brother, and I remember he turned around to me and he put his thumb up and he says, "See you, Pat," you know, as if giving me the two fingers, like, you can't make it stick and good luck. So I felt like running out and dragging him back in. He wasn't a grieving husband, he didn't give a shit, and that's about the height of it, like, you know.
Then a lead dropped right into their lap from a witness whose story held no ambiguity.
We got a phone call from a lady who said that she was friends with Nicky Pelly. Nicky had told her Joe said that he'd kill Rachel if he got away with it.
This new evidence from a friend of Joe O'Reilly's lover now promised to give Pat the edge.
This girl said to us that Nicky had told her Joe said that he'd kill Rachel if he got away with it. We had no reason to go back to Nikki a second time, and she was arrested based on this new information. We questioned her, and she admitted, yes, that Joe said it to me that he'd kill her if he could get away with it. But she says, I didn't think anything of it, just rubbish talk, like. She wouldn't have thought that he'd do such a thing.
While Nicky Pelly downplayed Joe O'Reilly's admission, Pat knew this testimony gave him a much stronger case to put before the Director of Public Prosecutions.
Here we have a witness that's saying Joe had said it to his girlfriend that he'd kill Rachel if he could get away with it. And it was that bit of evidence, or that statement, that the DPP changed their mind, like, you know.
Joe O'Reilly arriving at Swords District Court earlier today. The 35-year-old had been arrested this morning at a house in Dunleer, County Louth, and brought to Balbriggan Garda station.
Joe was arrested in October 2006. I and some of the detectives went to Dunleer, where his mother lived. We know he was staying there. Joe was standing in the kitchen in his stocking feet, and I put my hand on his shoulder and I said, Joe, I'm arresting you for the murder of Rachel O'Reilly. And he just said, can I put my runners on? He turned and he faced me, and I've never seen it before, but the blood drained from his face. He went white as a sheet. He was not expecting it.
Detective Sergeant Pat Marry told the court that at 10:55 a.m. he formally charged Mr. O'Reilly with the murder of his wife, Rachel O'Reilly, on October 4th, 2004 at the Knoll in County Dublin.
It was a great sense of relief to know they had what they thought was their man, and I was sure it was too, you know. Even looking at him that morning, they picked him up, brought him out to the van. The look on his face, I knew he was guilty, you know. It's funny the way you get these feelings.
But Joe pleaded not guilty. His trial was set for June 2007.
It was a huge trial. I think every media organisation had 2 or 3 journalists down. And yeah, you were fighting for seats every morning. The public galleries were absolutely packed. The court ushers were saying that they hadn't seen anything like it. It was June, and it just seemed that there was nothing else going on except for this court case.
Today at the Central Criminal Court, Joe O'Reilly pleaded not guilty to his wife's murder. A jury was then sworn in to hear this trial, which is expected to last 6 weeks.
This was the old courtroom, like space was at a premium. Remember, there were days when I'd end up sitting kind of beside Joe with just a prison guard sitting in between us. Like, that's how squished into the place you were. And he was a big guy, so he's really imposing on these really small, kind of narrow benches. And everyone's staring at him.
I hated looking at him. And he was always, he used to be writing things. Like, he was like one of the people defending him. And I used to feel like I was drowning, because I used to look at him and how blasé he was, and how that got to me an awful lot.
He had a grandioso type of personality, like, and most psychopathic people do. They have a confidence about them that they'll beat the system, that they'll be seen to be innocent at the end of the day, that we have made a mess of it, or we have it wrong, or whatever.
Key to the prosecution's case was a string of emails recovered from Joe O'Reilly's computer. They revealed a deeply manipulative plan.
The jury was given details of an exchange of emails between Joe O'Reilly and his sister Anne on the 9th of June 2004, 4 months before Rachel was killed.
I suppose one of the most distressing days for the Callaleys would have been the emails between Joe and his sister Anne that kind of revealed how he had been undermining Rachel for a long time, poisoning certainly his own family against her, about her capabilities as a mother.
He was saying, oh, she was getting them dressed last night and she nearly pulled the ear off one of the children, putting on the pajamas, and she dragged the other one down to bed, and painting the picture that she was a monster, like, you know, which she was far from.
To the point where, and we learned this through the emails, that his own mother had reported Rachel to the social services. So how stressful must that have been to be called in to a social services officer to try and prove to someone that you've never met before that you're fit and able, and then to wonder, you know, who could have reported you? It must have been unbearable for her.
Joe O'Reilly's behaviour was typical of an abusive partner attempting to exert control.
Well, a common tactic would be to try and create an external picture of the victim as being either incompetent or perhaps even, questioning their mental health or their behaviours. Like in this case, create a perception that perhaps she was not just a bad mother, but suggesting she might have been a risk to the children, which none of this is true. Now, the cause of that is actually the perpetrator, who is targeting the people who are probably best placed to support her, so it deflects the focus and the blame. It also means that they, instead of offering support, may actually reinforce the messages that he is kind of putting in her head constantly, that she is a bad mother, that there is something wrong.
Every one of those things that he told were complete and utter lies. And he was taking her character, and like as if she didn't love the children, I think they were the best things that happened to her.
He was manipulating her and trying to destroy her, really. He was taking away the things that were most important to her kids.
Joe's plan to use social services against his wife had failed.
In the first email, Mr. O'Reilly's sister Anne asks him how he got on. He replies that the social worker described Rachel as the main caregiver and him as the secondary caregiver. I'm already Mr. Weekend custody in the eyes of the state, he says. Doesn't bode too well, does it?
That's what he was relaying to his sister, that they were falling on Rachel's side, that she was a wonderful mother, and that he was going to be Mr. Weekend Dad.
The emails made Joe O'Reilly's motives clear. He wanted Rachel out of his life, but he wanted custody of their kids first.
It had been made clear to him that if they did get divorced or separated or whatever, he had no chance of getting custody of those children, because in Ireland, custody always goes to the mother.
He wanted his way, and he didn't get it, and he wasn't going to get it, so the only way is to kill Rachel.
For the family, finally hearing the details of Joe's manipulation was devastating.
We were just sickened how he spoke of her, the mother of your children, even if he hated her. And I often felt, God love her, she probably went through hell without saying anything to us.
We were shocked really to hear some of the things that he had said. Things that we wouldn't believe. You couldn't imagine him saying about Rachel what he said, and downgrading her all the time.
Coercive control is the playbook of a domestic abuser, a series of behaviours that have the impact on the victim, creating a situation where every single moment of her life, every choice, every decision she makes is controlled from within her own head, because she has been so worn down and in some cases gaslit, which would mean making somebody believe that they are incompetent, foolish, or even crazy in some cases. And all that does is hold somebody in a very isolated situation and make it very, very hard for them to leave.
Those emails revealed something about their relationship that we didn't know before. I think they would be even more powerful now because we know a lot more about what he was doing to her. We didn't have the terminology for it back then, but now we do, like coercive control, gaslighting. He was trying to destroy her, slowly but surely, by taking away the things that were most important to her. Her job as a mother, the life that she had built for them in the Knoll.
It was strong evidence of a motive for murder, but still only circumstantial. Pat had no forensic proof to physically link O'Reilly to the crime, but he had the next best thing.
Without the phone evidence, we would have been struggling big time.
There was it was almost like PowerPoint presentation on two screens on either side of the judge's bench. And it showed the journey his phone made up to Murphy's Quarry and back again, and the exact times that phone either received texts, made phone calls, made text. It was very comprehensive, and it was damning, and it was groundbreaking at the time.
The technical analysis that we were able to produce to the court, that was the breaking of the alibi, the cell site analysis. Put Joe O'Reilly at the scene that morning, out at Baldera Knoll at the time of his wife's death.
The jury had been sent away to deliberate on a Friday, and we didn't expect them to get it done in a day. There was just so much they had to go through.
I think ours was the first case, or maybe to go into a Saturday. The court's to be shut on Saturday, apparently, but they held that court open for that. It was hard waiting for the verdict to come, you know. There could be hours there, but then they had to do what was right. They had to arrive at a right verdict, you know.
I used to be thinking to myself, what am I going to do if he gets off with it? I just knew it was a knife edge.
It's very hard to read a jury. You just do not know what they're going to come back with. We didn't know. We just did not know.
They were in there all day. It was a long, hot, stinking summer day in that courtroom, and the tension was incredible.
It took just 2 days for the jury to reach a unanimous verdict. Guilty.
They read out the verdict and the place just went nuts. I've never seen anything like it. The Callaleys stood up screaming, thank God, thank God. I just remember watching Jim and Rose just hugging for the longest time and bawling, crying.
I never witnessed anything like it. I never will. The whole court erupted in a cry of emotion. And I was standing at the end of a row of all the guards who were involved in the case. And I looked down and each and every one of them were crying their eyes out. Rose, she came straight to me and the two of us had a big hug. And I burst out crying and I cried.
I just felt as if the weight of the world was lifted off my shoulders. As all I could do was cry.
There's that incredibly kind of like, you know, powerful picture of them coming out of the court together with all their arms raised up in the air, because it was a victory for them.
Is there anything you'd like to say about Rachel?
It's just she's with us now, and she knows we love her, and I wish she was with us in person, and we'll never forget you, Rachel, but you got justice today. People were so supportive in those days, you know. You just felt the whole country was on our side.
For Joe O'Reilly, the verdict meant life in prison.
Joe got a few minutes to say goodbye to his mum and family. I remember Anne just holding his two arms and kind of talking quite urgently to him, and him just kind of like nodding and going, okay, okay, okay. And then he was led away by the prison officers. When you think killers are going to be, you think that you're going to spot something about them, don't you? And he was very ordinary, very normal. I've met him a million times before. I've worked with loads of people like him. Yeah, you don't want to think someone that ordinary is capable of something so awful.
I remember talking to Joe once. I sat down beside him and I said, "Just Joe, you know, I think it'd be best to tell the truth about this now." And he just turned to me and he looked at me and he put his head right up to mine. He says, "Do you know, Pat, I didn't do it." And that was it. He got up and walked off. So that was what you were dealing with, like, you know.
In charge of the PSNI's Serious Crime Branch. I remember getting the call in the middle of the night. One of those calls you always dread receiving, and that somebody had been stabbed fatally in Belfast.
Tributes have been paid to boxer Eamon McGee Jr., who was murdered on the outskirts of West Belfast this morning.
Heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking. Who wants to hear that their brother's been stabbed?
People from right across the community came out in force just to show their support that I suppose boxing had lost one of their own. He was absolutely going to go to the top.
Somebody had knifed him. How did this happen? I just couldn't understand. Because Eamon was such a good child, he was never angry in his life.
It's so important that we put our hands on the suspect early.
We knew the murder had just happened. We have 24 hours to conduct the investigation.
One of the phrases you hear a lot is the dogs in the street know who did it.
Have we arrested the wrong person? And our hearts sank.
I'm Mary McGee and I'm the mother of Eamon.
On the 30th of May, 2015, Eamon McGee Jr. was found stabbed to death on a street corner in West Belfast.
Your kids aren't supposed to go in front of you. You're not supposed to carry your son's coffin, you know. It's just such a loss. You're helpless because you wanted to go and help your wee son. It's just not the way things should be.
He just had goals and he knew how to get them and how to go for them, and very headstrong person.
Eamon had two older siblings, Francis and Anya. He was studying engineering while working as a personal trainer. His father was the champion boxer Eamon Sr., who he had followed into the ring.
He had his boxing career on the go. He had his VPT business on the go. And then his first year finished engineering. 22 and everything to live for.
I was lying in bed with my oldest wee boy Cormac, but I heard a knock at the door and I was like, I got Eamon just messing about. But then I didn't see no car and I heard no doors. Something in my head just says ring Eamon's phone. The partner he was with at the time, Courtney Ward, answered and was like, he's dead, he's dead. And I was shouting and screaming, what do you mean he's dead, he's dead? She was just crying and sobbing, and by that stage then I had to run upstairs and I told my mummy, get to the hospital, quick, get down to the hospital.
When I went into the hospital, I was put into a room, two doctors were brought into me and just said, we tried for ages there and couldn't get him. And I went, who are you talking about? They went, your son Eamon McGee. And I went, no, not my son, not my son. I just walked around going, no, don't want to hear this. And he went, it's your son, Eamon.
She rang me. It's not even a blur, it's like, you don't even know how to put it into words. It was just so heartbreaking. I knew he was gone, and she just wouldn't admit it to me over the phone. Eamon's friend and his friend's father came and got me. Got to the hospital, and when I went in, the police were standing behind my mummy and they just looked at me and went like this. And I just dropped him and collapsed to the floor.
The first thing I need is make sure I've got the right resources going to the scene with me. So whilst I ring the Major Crime Forensic Advisor, they in turn ring photography, mappers, the crime scene investigators who are going to take samples and start to get everybody heading.
My name's Darren McCartney and I'm a Detective Chief Inspector in the PSNI Crime Operations Department. Early on the Saturday of the 30th of May 2015, I was on a weekend off and I was hoping to head off with my wife and children, but my senior investigator called, John, and said, Darren, there's a murder in Lisburn, and that's a part and parcel of the role you had. You just tend to drop everything and go.
The initial report into the police, we knew the murder had just happened. That started the clock for me.
It was in the early hours of Saturday morning that he was stabbed here in Summerhill Park in Twinbrook.
This is a period of time which is critical for detectives to maximise the opportunity, retrieve and gather evidence. This whole area was sealed off. We could see very clearly there was a car parked here just on the corner and there was a trail of blood that led from the gate all the way down to the road. There was no obvious immediate motive. There were no witnesses that were immediately identified at the scene. No CCTV, there was no sign of a murder weapon. So I was alarmed very early. There's nothing really here to be going on. The time is ticking by, and I know in cases like this that minutes and hours matter.
It's so important that we put our hands on the suspect early. Does the suspect provide a risk to the greater public or themselves? Are they carrying any forensic evidence on them that we need to obtain before they get rid of it or destroy it? And thirdly, do they have any weapons that we need to take off the street?
To John and Darren, Eamon's killing appeared to be a random knife attack.
I was unaware in the early hours of this whether I was dealing with one assailant, two, or whether this was a gang of people that had attacked Eamon.
How did this happen? I just couldn't understand. Because Eamon was such a good child, he was never angry in his life, never fought in his life. You know, nobody was at my door or anything. I couldn't understand this. I couldn't understand, like, somebody had knifed him. What did he get into a fight? Was there a fight? Where was he? I just, couldn't comprehend it.
Martin Rogan was Eamon Jr.'s boxing coach and a close family friend.
To be around such a lovely bunch of people, his mother Mary, Anya and Francis, you know, I know them all very, very closely, and it just hurts me to think the pain and suffering. I'm ready to break myself here. The pain and suffering that they're going through is terrible.
I got a text message, so at about 6 in the morning. Ian McKee's, he's been killed. What? In my head, I wasn't thinking of young Eamon. I was thinking of senior. It was only until I think it was 8 o'clock next morning, it was Eamon Jr. I went, what? I couldn't take it in that it was young Eamon, because it was this young, gentle soul, this humble young man gone. I'm wanting to lift the phone and ring, and then I didn't want to do it, to have to retell the story of why their amazing son was gone. I was trying my best not to see this. The visions in my head, seeing young Eamon.
Detectives now wondered who could be responsible for Eamon's murder. In Northern Ireland, every crime has to be considered in the context of sectarianism.
Obviously in Northern Ireland and the historical background, first thing everybody jumps to paramilitarism. However, this was a knife crime. It's very, very, very rarely that paramilitarism would be involved in knife crimes.
Whoever was responsible, the team faced conducting their investigation in precarious circumstances. The peace process was under strain following the killing of a prominent Republican.
Chuck Davison had been murdered earlier in the month, so tensions were high, and there had been quite a large number of attempted terrorist attacks on police.
The situation was made worse by a long-standing distrust of policing in the West Belfast community where Eamon was murdered.
Twinbrook would have verged on the border between Belfast and Lisburn, but fell within Lisburn's area. And that would have been probably in a state where police probably wouldn't have been as well received as others. A sort of challenging environment for police to work in.
Twinbrook in West Belfast, it's a very large urban working class community, overwhelmingly nationalist and Republican. We had just under 14 years of peace in terms of the Good Friday Agreement. Politics hadn't really stabilised itself. Issues around flags, parades, bonfires. Twinbrook, dominated by Sinn Féin as a political party. That party didn't sign up to policing until 2007, so that literally was only 8 years of acceptance of the police and the criminal justice system in that area. In any other society, that relationship was already there. But in the case of Twinbrook, that's what makes things more difficult and more convoluted in terms of investigations.
Historically, there's been distrust of policing in Twinbrook and that general West Belfast area. We need community involvement, we need community assistance, we need the witnesses. A young man from our own community had been killed, and we wanted to get a resolution for that, for them, for his family.
Courtney, Eamon's partner at the time, was present at the scene, and that gives us an opportunity for a very early account from Courtney to understand why was Eamon out in the street, what happened, what were they doing that night. Courtney had described quite an ordinary evening where they'd ordered pizza. In the house in question, there was 2 ways into it, so it was quite often or quite normal for delivery people to be mixed up and confused with the best way in. And Eamon had gone out in order to see where the delivery driver was. We entered the crime scene to do the assessment. We followed a trail of blood. We had the house in question secured as a crime scene, the back garden. And it was upon entering the back garden that we noticed some areas of blood on the gate and also just on the grass area. So that absolutely changed things for me, because this attack seemed to have occurred in the back garden. So the early hypothesis that had been formed was maybe no longer fitting, that we weren't looking at a stranger attack, an altercation that had taken place out on the street. This was maybe something much more sinister, much more premeditated. We were looking at somebody that had deliberately sought out Eamon McGee.
He did have a terrible death, and he was such a happy-go-lucky person. We couldn't put the story together that night, what had happened or why it had happened. He was stabbed 5 times, so there was blood coming out of him everywhere, and the doctors were working with him. The blood was in his ears, and his hair was soaked with blood. His hair was all hard, and me and Anya were going, by God, he would hate to be lying there like that, you know. Everybody looking at him.
In Twinbrook, police sealed off the crime scene and began a murder investigation. Their presence immediately drew the attention of local community leaders.
I was asked to go down to the outer cordon because a Sinn Féin councillor had asked to speak to the senior investigating officer to understand what had taken place. I was very courteous, professional, gave them a loose briefing that there had been a stabbing. After that exchange, I walked back up to the crime scene to continue the work there. And when I got back there, I spoke to my detective inspector. We're nowhere here with this. The community have the answer here. I can't rely on the traditional media appeal. We need something faster. We need this now.
One of the phrases you hear a lot is the dogs in the street know who did it. And the reality is the public look to their political representatives for guidance and for support and for confidence to engage with the police.
So I walked back down again and asked to see the councillor, and I said, look, I'll just be honest with you, and I'm going to ask for help. It was difficult because detectives, we keep our investigation tight, secure, don't talk about it. And this was probably one of the first times I had taken somebody into, I suppose, the confidence.
If John was right, the community would quickly reveal vital evidence. If he was wrong, the entire investigation could be undermined. He hoped to rely on the respect in which Eamon was held by the community.
Young Eamon was very dedicated. Sport, eating, fitness. If he wasn't training in the ring, he was away doing something else, you know. So I would say maybe about 11 the interest started to grow. It was like a family sport. I think it put a bit of a regime into him. We bit of independence to start to look after himself as well. He was just a real wee man, you know, loved his style, and he was very charismatic.
Word about Eamon's death spread quickly around Belfast's closely knit boxing community, uniting the group in grief.
Boxing in Belfast especially, it's in the DNA of the city. We all say there's nearly a boxing club at the corner of every street, especially in the west and north of the city. It draws people in from the four corners of a city. It's nearly easier to divide than unite. Politics has always been kept out of boxing. You would have clubs from different sections of the community would work very well together. It's nearly a community within itself. It's produced so many great champions over the years. It helps take kids maybe away from different antisocial activities. It teaches them kind of discipline and respect and help our communities kind of grow. A couple of nights before the funeral was a vigil, and some local politicians, members of the boxing community, just members of the community in general, came up, and the mood out of it was the saddest thing I'd ever attended.
We had all the support that we wanted. The vigil and everything was amazing that was held on the Tuesday night. It was absolutely unreal. Hundreds and hundreds of people showed up.
I remember the chapel at St. Joseph's in Hannatown was absolutely packed out. It was standing room only, outside and inside. People from right across the community, right across Belfast, the boxing community in particular, came out in force just to show their support that I suppose boxing had lost one of their own.
This young man, with such a bright and promising future, should be taken from us in such a cruel manner.
This was a young, promising boxer that had been murdered. It only takes a tweet from somebody like Carl Frampton and Paddy Barnes and others really to catch the media attention, and this had gone bigger than Northern Ireland and was attracting media internationally. It was also cranking up the profile of the murder, and the focus was very much on the investigation and how we were going to solve this murder.
There was no obvious reason for Eamon's murder. He had no criminal background and was unknown to the police. But his partner Courtney revealed a potential lead.
Courtney told us about her husband, who she was estranged with and had been estranged from for many months now. On the basis of some of the things she said, that caused me concern. She had told her ex-husband that she was now with somebody else and that she no longer loved him. And that was on the day before the murder, so this was on the Friday, and the murder took place in the early hours of Saturday morning. So we had the start of something that I would describe as a motive. It wasn't much to go on, I have to say. If you have a motive, then you need to look at, is there an opportunity? The relationship started when Courtney and her family went to Turkey on a family holiday. She met Oren. He worked in a hotel. That then developed into a relationship. They spent some years in Turkey. They eventually got married, and he came to Northern Ireland around 2012.
They had 3 children. Their relationship had broken down, although he did have daily contact with the children. But beyond that, we knew very little about him.
We don't know where he is. We don't know where he works. If he works, we know absolutely nothing.
Detective McVeigh needed to track down Orhan Koka, and quickly. He once more turned to the community leaders for their help.
I named him to the councillor.
Police sometimes can be very reluctant to share information. So the fact that information is being shared is the start of a relationship. You build a relationship, you build a partnership. You build a partnership, you build good outcomes.
Within 2 hours, I was told where Owen Koka slept and where he worked.
We discovered that he'd been living in a local bar. He was working there, and the owner had allowed him to reside on the premises at night time. We also knew that the suspect worked during the day in a local barber's.
Just 8 hours after Eamon was murdered, the local community had led detectives to their chief suspect. But uncovering forensic evidence to link him to the murder would be a challenge.
I had absolutely no evidence and was concerned that the scene was highly unlikely to produce anything. The murder scene was in the back garden of an address that Oran Cocha had legitimate access to. He had been at the house that day. Any forensic evidence was going to be meaningless. Making somebody a suspect for murder and being arrested for murder is a significant decision. If you get it wrong, it has quite far-reaching consequences.
Despite the risks, the PSNI decided to go ahead with the arrest.
Around about 9 a.m. there was a decision made that we'd go and make an arrest of Cocha. Detective Constable Logan was just tasked to go and conduct the arrest. She walked in and Cocha just happened to be in the Barbers at the time. He had his mobile phone in his hand. I think he was a little bit nonplussed about being arrested by a woman. His reply was, "I've done nothing. Don't know why you're here."
The owner of the Barbers asked him in Turkish, what is this about? What have you done? Have you done anything? Are you in trouble? And he was denying it. He showed to us maybe the first signs of who and what Oran Cocha is. And that is somebody who has an issue with females. When we arrested Oran Cocha at Moe's Barbers, the second clock started ticking. We have 24 hours to conduct the investigation and to complete the interviews.
We received his mobile phone from him. Phones are really important to policing, and just so happened that when we moved to make an arrest, Cocha was the phone in his hand. A, we've got the phone. B, we can attribute it to Cocha. We submit that to some of our specialist teams for examination.
Things are now coming back in our favour. We've got some control. We have him, we have his phones. We start to think there's opportunities, there's potential, and we knew that we had established a crime scene at Beckett's Bar.
This was where Cocha worked, and where detectives now began a forensic search.
We went straight and acted on the information that was given to us by the community. We knew from the information that he had worked there the night before, and he'd been there, most importantly, after the murder, and that created the opportunity for us to search for the murder weapon, search for clothing, and search for any trace evidence that may have been left.
Beckett's was a busy bar, which held regular functions for the community. Cancelling them could inflame local tensions. Not doing so could risk the loss of vital evidence.
So there was an option, say to the bar, sorry, don't care, everybody out, we'll let you know when we've finished with your bar. Or we can seek cooperation. We can look at where the middle ground is, what we can do to facilitate both. And I think that got us a lot of goodwill from the owner of the bar and from the staff. We were actually showing that we were concerned about his business.
Meanwhile, the community grieved the loss of a young man held in high esteem.
Young Eamon Jr., the main man, if everybody had the frame of mind that that young man had, what he was doing feeds into other kids that they can box and they can also get degrees. It's about believing in yourself.
I thought he was absolutely fantastic. He really was. He was a proper fighter in his own right. Of course, there's going to be whispers that there's McGee's son, is he going to go all the way? But talking to people in boxing about him, they were convinced that, yeah, he absolutely would. His professional debut took place in 2014. I think everybody at ringside that night looked at each other going, whoa, we've something special here. He was absolutely going to go to the top.
I think he just wanted the Excel to be something that he wanted to be. It was sport, sport, sport. Education, education, education. How do you beat that? Me and him had many a conversation, and I think that's where our bond really came from, because I was able to understand him.
Eamon and young Eamon weren't even speaking. Young Eamon didn't like the way big Eamon carried on with drink, and there was a row, and he said, I don't want you coming to train me smelling of alcohol every day. And I think it's hard now on him, because you just meet Eamon, he just cries all day long.
I can understand he doesn't want to be trained as daddy. I can understand that. I knew the situation in his relationship with his father, and I felt for him because I didn't have the greatest relationship with my father. So I was able to sort of communicate with him, and many a time me and him had a good personal, private conversations about life and, you know, forgiveness and trying to help him out. Pardon me. I was able to relate to young Eamon because I knew how he was feeling, and I just knew that I could help young Eamon not feel the way that I felt growing up too. Yeah.
While forensic searches continued at the bar where Coca worked, John began to piece together his movements on the night of the murder.
There was a number of bits of information that came out of our inquiries. So we knew that we could anchor the time of the murder almost to the very minute. It was confirmed that there was a period during the night that Owen Coca had left the premises. He had told the night watchman that he was going out to purchase some food, and that was at around 1:30, 1:45 in the morning. The night watchman wanted to make sure that he could lock up properly for the night to fulfill his duties. He had rang Owen Coca's mobile number within 2 minutes of when we believe the murder took place, and the purpose of that call was, "Where are you and when are you coming back?" When he didn't get an answer from Owen Coca, the phone rang out. Importantly, maybe 15-20 minutes later, he heard the shutters of the doors coming down. Owen Coca returned to the bar. That time, that 20 minutes, is the length of time it would take you to make your way back from the murder scene to Beckett's bar. That got me really excited as an investigator. We had Owen Coca's mobile phone, we had his telephone number, and here we are, somebody has put a call into his phone right at the time of the murder.
Experts now began to analyse Orhan Coca's mobile phone. And at Beckett's bar, forensic investigators made their first breakthrough.
Our hypothesis was that he'd been involved in a frenzied knife attack. The likelihood of blood transfer from the victim to the suspect was high. He could have taken that back to the bar, to the area where he was living. So we were hoping to be able to recover something that could connect the victim and the bar, and thus Coca in the middle. Fortunately, once our search teams started conducting their searches, they very quickly found a pair of bloodstained jeans behind one of the bars.
But did they belong to Orhan? Unless John could answer that, he would have to release Coca from custody within a matter of hours.
We made a decision to fast track that, to make that the #1 forensic priority. We needed to know who owned the jeans. Whilst we may suspect they were Owen Coca's, we did not know. We commissioned the forensic laboratory to do habitual, which is identify the wearer of the jeans through DNA. Areas such as the waistband, the pockets, areas that would have common contact with skin. They worked overnight. It roughly takes 24 hours for the DNA cycle to run. We were against the clock.
I couldn't go to the house. I simply couldn't go. I wasn't being selfish, I was being thoughtful. It wouldn't have been good for his family for me to come in and break it down in front of them. It would be very unfair. In the morning of his funeral, I went down and I just walked in and put my hand on Eamon's shoulder. And he looked around, he seen me and he went, just grabbed my arm. Eamon Jr. had this lovely aura around him. It didn't fizz him. He knew his capabilities, he knew his strengths, and he knew where he wanted to go. A lot of kids, if they want to look up to somebody, he's a person that you can look up to. I actually looked up to him as well because he was so humble.
Experts continued their analysis of data retrieved from Orhan Koka's phone. John and his team were convinced it would prove their case against him.
We were going to get information from the phone that placed the phone at the murder scene at the time of the murder, and that was going to be priceless. The evidential value of that was going to be significant. So we thought, here we go, we're on track. We're going to get a cell site analysis that would place it consistent with the house. We got information back, and was to my dismay, not only did it show that the phone was not at the murder scene, it almost then went to undermine our case. It proved that the phone was miles away from the murder scene. Are we on the right path here? Have we arrested the wrong person? Because his phone is showing to be active in a different part of Belfast at the time of the murder, and our hearts sank.
John now faced another setback as the community's cooperation turned to hindrance.
Following the identification of the suspect, there were a number of attacks on properties.
One such attack was on the barber shop where Orhan Koka worked.
3 a.m. and a blue van plows into a barber shop.
We have retaliation taking place in the community, attacks taking place on Mo's barber shop.
The community have been, very helpful to me. I'm part of this community, and this is my home, and I just want to be left alone and get on with my business.
People had taken this out on the Turkish community.
Within any area, a tight-knit community, you're under pressure, regardless of whether it's loyalist or Republican or nationalist or unionist. Also, you have to remember that in areas like this, that not necessarily used to how slow the criminal justice system can take. People want instant justice, people want instant answers.
I had so much anger inside me and so much rage. I'm glad that I had my wife sitting beside me, because I think I would have went in search for what they'd done to him. That 2 wrongs don't make it right.
Those actions were harming our case. We relied on Mo's barber to help our case, trying to manage community tensions.
There's that balance between allowing due process to take place, gathering the information, providing the evidence, building the case, but also trying to keep the community on side and making them aware of what you're doing.
John's message to the community was clear.
Just bear with us. We are on a path here. We are hopeful that we will get to the right place, but the racial attacks taking place is a distraction for the investigation.
As in any area where this happens, there's the quick reaction from the community who want justice, who want retribution, and will lash out.
Detectives were worried that if chaos took hold, important evidence would be lost or destroyed. In particular, the murder weapon.
Forensic teams were continuing to search various locations in and around Twinbrook. One of the things they're looking for is the knife used to stab Eamon McGee Jr. in the early hours of yesterday morning.
We knew from speaking to members of staff at the bar that a knife had gone missing, and very, very fortunately for us, it had only recently been purchased. The bar owner was able to tell us where he got it, what it looked like.
We purchased the same knife and did a media appeal because we were thinking this knife was maybe discarded in hedgerows or in somebody's garden in the path, and whilst we had searched for it, we hadn't located it.
We know that he armed himself with a substantial size of a knife and brought it to the murder scene.
We know that Eamon died from knife injuries. The pathologist had reported the scale of the blade that we were looking for, and again, that blade was consistent with the knife that was missing from Beckett's kitchen. We were hoping that we would recover a murder weapon, we would recover Eamon McGee's blood from the knife, and we would ideally recover either fingerprints or DNA evidence.
As the team continued their search for the murder weapon, analysis of CCTV revealed why Coca's phone had not been present at the crime scene.
The day before, when Owen Coca had worked and finished work at 5 o'clock, we could see that he left his phone in Moe's Barber. And we had it on CCTV that that phone was left overnight in Moe's Barber, and that took away my worry. That put us back on track.
Coca always denied the murder and claimed to have barely known Eamon McGee. But evidence from his phone now suggested otherwise.
We were starting to get evidence that would have been very reliable because it was digital format, not really able to be disputed.
A number of apps had been deleted from the phone that morning within minutes before his arrest. Why are you deleting these apps, Facebook and so on, from your phone? Well, it's probably because you think there's something to hide there. Deeper examination of that was able to indicate that where Coca said he had occasionally seen Eamon McGee on Facebook, well, we were able to establish it was a little bit more than occasionally. Did he know who Eamon McGee was? Absolutely, he knew who Eamon McGee was.
Eamon McGee, the name, was the most searched for item on Owen Coca's phone. We've recovered and seen some photographs of posts. It was very clear from those photographs that Courtney and Eamon were now in a relationship.
We were able to tell how many times he'd visited his Facebook page. He had copied and kept pictures on the phone of Eamon. He had set up a pseudonym on Facebook and used that to befriend Courtney's friends, and thus using those friendships we were able to track what was going on with Courtney and Eamon McGee on a cyber basis. So he was cyber stalking.
If we hadn't got there so quickly and Owen Coca had managed to finish his day's shift at the Barbers and leave with his telephone, we may never have got that telephone. That is a result of the golden hour actions. That is turning around the information that comes in from the community, from critical people.
Evidence from Eamon's family suggested Coca had gone beyond cyber stalking.
Eamon had confided in Francis, my big brother, what was going on. He was already getting death threats. To me, he didn't really seem worried. He was still up and about and loving life and enjoying himself.
Detectives were now convinced their hunch about Orhan Coca was correct. He had murdered Eamon McGee out of jealousy.
Heartbreaking. Absolutely heartbreaking. Who wants to hear that their brother's been stabbed over a woman? Absolutely heartbreaking.
The team delved deeper into Coca's relationship with his ex-wife and discovered disturbing evidence.
I would put Owen Coca down as a controller who is jealous, who has some issues with the role of females. If she was as much seen posting on Facebook with anybody, it was an immediate assumption that she was having an affair.
Members of Courtney's family came forward, and there were then suggestions of previous threats towards Courtney's father with a knife. You know, emotionally, it's a prime case of coercive control, controlling Courtney's life.
My name is Dr. Susan Lighton. I am a psychologist within the School of Psychology at Ulster University. Coercive control is a pattern of negative behaviour which is used to dominate, intimidate and really try and control a person. Its main aim is to ensure that a person is no longer independent. Not all coercive control will have physical elements to it. Some of it will be psychological and emotional. It was very clear that there was a sense of possessiveness within the relationship in terms of who she could see, who she could speak to. These are really clear indicators of coercive control, even after the relationship had ended. It's not that you end the relationship and the abuse ends. It continues for weeks, months, years of being attacked by an individual in multiple ways.
Social media was central to Coca's ongoing efforts to control his ex-partner.
I know in this particular case that there was a lot of fake accounts created in order to monitor and keep up to date with particular movements. It's very common and would fall into that sort of stalking-like and monitoring behaviour.
It was clear Orhan was engaged in coercive control. But detectives still needed evidence he was at the crime scene and responsible for Eamon's murder.
We were confident that we had established a motive. We were confident that we had established that Owen Coca had the opportunity to commit the crime. We were confident that we had recovered digital evidence from his phone. He had downloaded a photograph of Eamon McGee. I would say that he had downloaded that photograph in order to make sure he got the right person. We were having discussions with the prosecution service. We were presenting a case which was circumstantial in nature, but that still fell short. Until the 11th hour, really what the prosecution service required was that definitive bit of evidence. It is the phone call that you always want to have, and when you get that call to say that you have got not only the victim's blood on the jeans, but Owen Coca's DNA on the jeans, without any complications in the DNA mix, pure million to one chance.
Having received the conclusive forensic results on the genes, the team finally felt they had enough evidence to present their case to the PPS.
Having had the results come back, I remember speaking to the prosecution service who gave the final green light, and it was the greatest conversation to say to Darren, charge that man with murder.
I charged Owen Coca. He is again nonplussed, made no reply after caution. Could have been charging him with anything, not the taking of a young man's life.
Darren made his arrest just 72 hours after Eamon McGee's murder. Assistance from the community was key to the fast progress of the case. But now it seemed that support went only so far.
We were being fed very helpfully, and we're very grateful for the information that was coming, but it's very different between knowing what happened and proving what happened. And quite often in murder investigations, we know what happened, but we haven't been able to secure the evidence that is capable of being presented before court in order to convince a jury of somebody's guilt. So whilst it was helpful, nobody was supplying witness statements to the police investigation.
The case relied on evidence from the security guard at Beckett's bar. It helped establish Orhan's movements on the night of the murder, evidence detectives badly needed on the record.
That's one of the people that we felt needed to get a bit of permission to talk to us. He was happy to chat to us, but not formally, not give us written statements.
Without this evidence, The detective's entire case against Orhan was seriously undermined. Again, detectives turned to community leaders for help.
In the immediate years after Sinn Féin's endorsement of policing, it became apparent that the community didn't make relationships with institutions. It made relationships with people. And that's really important to understand. They wanted to see neighbourhood policing, they wanted to engage with the police on the ground, and they wanted to develop a relationship. And that's how you start to develop the rapport between the public and the police itself.
You have to be open and engage with the right people to give the community confidence. Investigation is going well, but if we do not have statements signed by the witnesses, this person is not going to be charged. We had been respectful of the significance of the events that were taking place, how we had interacted with the witnesses, and the legitimate desire by everybody to bring justice to the McGee family. When you add that all together, people felt confident to come forward.
But following John's intervention with the community, he came forward, we had a statement, and he was prepared to go to court and give evidence in relation to that.
The case took 2 years to come to court. During that time, Orhan maintained his innocence, but sacked several of his legal teams. He had last faced trial in March 2017.
My name is Ashley MacDonald and I'm a court reporter primarily covering Belfast Crown Court. The name Eamon McGee, everybody in Belfast and beyond knows that name because of his dad, the boxer, so I automatically knew that this was going to be a very high profile case because of who his father was. And then really as the story unfolded, it was just horrendous. So on that day, the trial was ready to proceed. The public gallery was packed with Eamon's friends and family. I was certainly ready to report on a 2 or 3 week trial. The Crown was ready to present its case. The judge was ready to go. There had been 2 or 3 weeks set aside for this very important trial to be heard. And it was quite strange because we were waiting for the jury to be sworn, and then his defence barrister asked the judge if he could have a brief adjournment. Sometimes in a situation like this, a defendant pleads at the last minute. But with this defendant, he hadn't admitted anything in these 2 years. He'd barely spoken about it. And in that brief adjournment for 25-30 minutes, there was a strange atmosphere in the court. I kept looking at him and he just kept his head down, so I really didn't have a gut instinct at that point, but there was a certain tension whenever the barristers came back into the court and the judge came back into the court. There was a bit of a tension in the air, and I did think, oh, is he going to be rearranged here? Is he finally going to admit to what he did? And he did.
I remember them being took down off the docks and looked at me, sorry for your loss, and away walked on. Nodded his head and smiled. Then, as he was walking past Francis, he went like that to him. You're next. He's a foul man.
It may well have been only the second murder that I dealt with where jealousy was the motive. Jealousy is a very sinister trait and is one that one could have held in abundance. For somebody to be thinking about murder, to act on those thoughts, pre-plan, pre-prepare, he had time to reflect and consider not to do this, could have backed out of it at any point.
I think in this particular case, the new relationship was certainly a trigger for this individual in terms of their possessiveness, their jealous behaviour, their sense of dominance over a person had certainly aggravated and provoked what was a very violent act. I think the behaviour can be triggered within relationships. If you are, shall we say, behaving yourself within the relationship and doing as the abuser would like you to do and behaving in the way they'd like you to behave, often when you step out of that, or if you try to move away from the relationship, it can be quite triggering for an abuser. And it means that they may escalate their own behaviours from things like psychological and emotional abuse to maybe more threatening behaviour or even violent physical behaviour.
Orhan Koka must serve a minimum term of 14 years before he can be considered for release.
They were probably glad that they got the guilty plea, because this was finally a recognition of what he did. You know, would you really want to see a man deny murdering your son, your brother, for those 3 weeks?
We're the one with the life sentence, not him. Do you know, he's going to get out in a few years. He's going to go back to Turkey and live his life again. We're left with this for the rest of our lives. But then I didn't want it to happen because I honestly think my mummy would have died of a broken heart then.
Although they probably would like to have seen him explain his actions more if he ever would have gone under cross-examination in the dock, what they did was get a confession which ultimately led to conviction. The fact that he'd adjourned proceedings and delayed proceedings because of his continual sacking of legal teams. So he did play the system, and the 14-year minimum sentence was imposed. Ultimately the judge decides this, but the family accepted the sentence, but I don't think they were particularly happy with it, and I don't think that it reflected the severity of the crime.
The judge, he couldn't look at us for some reason, the judge, because he wanted to give him a heavier sentence, but he couldn't, he just had to go by law. 2 years he had done before he even got the sentence. And there's 6 to do, and we're still left crying every single day.
He's never going to come back. Do you know, that's him now, that's his life. He's gone forever. Doesn't have a life. Where Orhan Koka gets to come out of prison in a few years, go back to Turkey, and he can start all over.
"14 years seems like nothing compared to the life sentence that Courtney and the McGee family face. Do I feel it's enough? No, I do not. If it had been doubled, would I feel it's enough? Probably not.
That young man's not coming back. That family will be grieving until they go and meet again. All they can do is kiss a photograph and say happy birthday. That's not 14 years. That's a life sentence.
John puts the success of his investigation down to one pivotal decision.
To this day, I suppose 8 years later, I would be convinced that had I not done an about turn on that hill to speak to the counsellor, that I would have lost opportunities in this investigation. This was the first time, I suppose, maybe direct, active engagement that was not tokenism. This was, I need you. You know, I really need you on this occasion. I don't have the answers. I am not going to get this evidence, but you can.
Sometimes people think that when you live in Northern Ireland you become desensitised to violence because of the conflict and living through the conflict and what that meant to people and families. And I just think that, and something like this happens, and the horrific nature of it and the brutality involved shook me, and it shook other people as well.
What done my head in the most, it was like everyone kept saying to me, you gotta be strong, you gotta be strong, you have to, you have to, you have to. I made sure I kept it up here for everyone. But now I think, now I'm only starting to grieve really, big time. Like any mother would be, she's heartbroken. She's a ghost. Still is to this day. She's just a frame. She's not the Mary, the mother, the loving, kind person She's loving kind, but she's just not the full person that I used to know.
Mary McGee will never forget the last time she saw her son.
Yeah. Just that evening that he had left the house, me and his sister Anya were leaning over the banister talking to him. Me and him had a wee thing from he was no age. You know, that used to be the Barney song, I love you, you love me. And so me and him used to say, me you son, me you mummy, and all that. So and he said upstairs, me you mummy. And then he just went on out to his class.
Beautiful smile, and the shyness of a smile where he tipped his head a wee bit. You couldn't help but like him. I want to remember him as a champion. A champion. And that's him in a nutshell, a champion.
We never stopped talking about him, ever. Cormac, my oldest wee boy, was Eamon's godson. He talks about him every single day. Eamon, my middle wee boy, I constantly just tell him who he's named after, and it's just stories, wee things pop in your head every single day and you talk to them. And then Kate, obviously my youngest, he's just a baby, so, but I will drill it into his head.
You just keep thinking, what if he had graduated? What if he had made the boxing? You know, he would have been married, wee family of his own, wee house of his own, car on the road. Just think all these different things. But it's never going to happen now.